Hello, welcome in, Gamer Fiend here, and welcome to my new video. This is Looping 101. Now, for those of you that don't know what looping is, it essentially means that you're running the killer around and buying as much time as possible. But as a survivor, the main skill that you want to try and adopt as fast as you can is being able to hold a chase with a killer. So in this video, we're going to be going over mind games, we're going to be going over L&T walls, we're going to be going over safe and unsafe pallets, we're going to be going over different vault speeds, we're going to be doing all sorts. I hope you like it, I hope there's something in here for you, and let's get into the video. Right, first one's first, we're going to be going over safe and unsafe pallets. Now, what would be considered a safe pallet is a pallet that is in the open somewhere that has got a nice open viewable loop, somewhere that's got a decent view of where you're going to be able to run. Now, safe pallets you don't really want to be throwing straight away. You want to be keeping those and trying to save them as long as you can, because the killer is going to be aware as soon as you throw that pallet that you're buying time from them, but they are going to be able to kick it, which means you won't be able to use it again. So safe pallets, nice, open and usable for a decent loop. You also want to keep in mind, at a safe pallet, you don't want to push your luck too much. Yes, it's great being able to buy time from the killer, but if they do manage to down you, that safe pallet is completely gone against its purpose. Up next, we've got unsafe pallets. Now, unsafe pallets are the opposite of a safe pallet. Sounds kind of obvious, but that's how it is. An unsafe pallet would be a pallet in a tight loop area, somewhere where a killer can sort of mind game you around the edge of the pallet, maybe land a hit on you without you even having to throw it. It's a pallet that's in a tight area or somewhere where the killer can see all the way across it, and it becomes a vulnerable pallet, because you can be hit from almost any angle, providing that the killer has a decent enough lunge. There's unsafe pallets on almost every map in the game, so you've got to be wary as to which pallet you choose to run a killer towards if you're trying to lead chase. Up next are a couple of perk concerns. Now, the first clip you're going to be seeing is regarding Bamboozle. This is a killer perk from the clown that you can bring. It essentially blocks a window for 30 seconds after the killer vaults it. So if a killer brings you to Killer Shack and you vault the window and then they vault it, you will no longer be able to vault that window for the next 30 seconds. And another perk to be aware of is Blood Favor. If a killer lands an M1 attack on you, it will block any pallets within your vicinity. So you need to be wary of that fact when you're being chased by a killer who might be running Blood Favor. Up next are God pallets. Now, God pallets are essentially really strong pallets in the game. Quite a lot of the maps in this game have something referred to as a God pallet. Now, a lot of the times you'll find these around Killer Shack, but sometimes they'll be, for example in this clip, on the stairs at RPD. They are pallets that have got a massive loop around them that have huge possibilities for buying a lot of time from the killer. You want to try and save these for as long as you can. Ideally, save them for the end game, because if it comes to a scenario where you might need to try and res people off of the ground, if a killer is trying to slug, for example, you can then use God Pallet to try and buy 30 or so seconds, maybe even longer, depending on how long you can hold a chase. You can use God Pallet and that loop around God Pallet as a means to buy time to try and rescue some survivors in the end game. Or, for example, when you're trying to push a generator that might be 90% done and the killer might have eruption, for example, it just allows you to buy some time to get other stuff done during the meantime. But God pallets you want to try and leave as long as you possibly can, because once they're gone, they're gone. And now is probably the most useful tip in this entire video: hugging loops tight. Now, almost all of the killers, aside from the nurse, are faster than you on your feet, so you want to make as much time up as possible. When you are hugging a loop tight, you are saving area that you need to run. So you want to try and save a pallet, run around that loop as tightly as possible, and try and stay out of melee range of the killer. If you can nail this, you can save a lot of time. It isn't much in the grand scale of things, but in the midst of a chase, half of a second could be massive. Up next is saving pallets as long as possible. So when you find a strong pallet in a game, if you run the killer towards it and the killer doesn't manage to get you to throw that pallet, you can run them around the loop for longer. It's only common sense. So if you get towards a strong pallet or an area with a pallet you think you might be able to use later, try and keep it as long as possible. It will make the killer wary of entering that area if you haven't thrown it yet. If you have thrown it and they haven't kicked it, it gives you a vault location. So you want to try and save a pallet for as long as possible. On the subject of saving pallets as long as possible, you may notice in this clip that I have yellow auras over all pallets and vault locations. That is a perk called Windows of Opportunity. If you're struggling to find a pallet or a vault in a chase, I highly recommend taking this perk. It has really helped me out to no end, especially when you're on tight maps and maps with indoor areas like RPD where you can't necessarily see what's around the corner. It will highlight them in yellow and make your life 10 times easier. Another quick one, ideally you want to be trying to stay on the opposite side of a loop. If you watch me in this clip, you'll notice I'm trying to jockey the killer and stay on the opposite side at all times. This is for two reasons. One, if you can stay on the opposite side of the loop, you can try and preempt what a killer's going to do or even get a sight of what they're going to do. And two, when you're on the opposite side of the loop, they've got to go all the way around to try and get to you, so it gives you a nice bit of safe running space. So when you go towards a loop, if you can, try and vault a window, get to the opposite side of it and try and preempt what the killer's going to do. Preempting is 9/10 of the game. If you can get the idea of what their next movement's going to be, you can get to the opposite side and counter it. It makes so much sense. Quick bit of information about vaults. There are 3 different types of vaults in this game. You've got the slow vault, the mid vault and the fast vault. The slow vault is 1.5 seconds, the mid vault is 0.9 seconds and the fast vault is 0.5 seconds. In order to get a fast vault or a running vault, you need to be sprinting directly at the window for 2.5 meters. So bear in mind this information when you're trying to get away from a killer across a vault location. Up next, we've got Killer Shack. I mentioned Killer Shack a while ago. Killer Shack is probably the prime location to loot killers. Now, reason being is if you can stay on the opposite side of Killer Shack, you can preempt where the killer's going to go. What I like to do, as you'll see in this clip here, is stand right on the corner of Killer Shack, just behind the wall so that the killer cannot directly see you, but you can see around, pivoting your camera with the third-person camera that the survivor uses. Bear in mind the killer can only use the first-person camera, so you can use this to your advantage. You want to run to the corner of Killer Shack on the outside, stay behind the wall, angle your camera to the side like I am in this clip here, which will allow you to see which direction the killer walks in. You can then counter the opposite way. But bear in mind the killers can still moonwalk and hide their stain, so you want to look for the killer's actual player character rather than the red stain. If you can keep yourself on the opposite side of the shack and keep peering around the edges, it will give you such a big advantage when it comes to splitting and trying to get a little bit of distance from the killer. And now we've got another really strong loop location, the L&T walls. Now, they are named this because they are literally in the shape of an L&T and they are next to each other. They look similar to what would be called a jungle gym, but they are L&T walls. Now you can vault and loop these counterclockwise and clockwise. If you are able to run whilst looking backwards to monitor where the killer's going, you can use these massively to your advantage. Be aware, however, though, once you vault each one of these vault locations 3 times, the entity will block them, so you can only run an L&T for so long if you're using the vault locations. But up until that point, you can really buy a lot of time from the killer and L&T. Going back to what we were saying about the vault locations being blocked, the actual number on this is 3. You can vault it 3 times before the entity themselves blocks the window. So be wary of this when you're looping a killer. It might seem like a really good loop, but once you've used up the 3, there is no way of using that window again until it despawns. So you're going to want to make sure you are carefully vaulting as and where you can. And the final tip of the video for today is based around mind games. Now, mind gaming a killer is essentially when you're trying to get them to do one thing whilst you do another. Whether this be trying to get them to swing for you at a vault location when you haven't actually vaulted, whether it means peeking around a wall to try and get them to go one way and then you go the other. It essentially means trying to trick the killer into doing something that you want them to so you can carry on the loop or split from the loop. Now, there isn't a real go-to tip for this. It's kind of intuitive once you've played the game for long enough, but what you want to be doing is going back to a tip I said earlier, trying to stay on the opposite side of a loop so that they can't easily get to you, and also trying to get a feel for what the killer's playstyle is. If somebody's playing Bubba, like in this clip for example, you can almost bet that they're going to want to use the chainsaw as soon as they can, especially if you're at full health. So if you can mind game them around the pallet and keep that in mind, you'll be able to know when they're going to be revving up the chainsaw to hit you. You'll hear the sound and you'll be able to bolt for one of the vault locations or throw the pallet for safety. And that is your lot for today. Thank you very, very much for watching. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of your support, and I'd like to say a huge thank you to everybody who subbed to me and supported me. We have recently hit 1,000 subscribers. It is literally just the watch time hours now before I can apply for YouTube Partner. So thank you all very, very, very much for your support. I appreciate it. If you liked today's video, please leave it a like. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If there's anything else specific you'd like to see, please leave it in the comments below. I love making videos. I really, really hope there's some stuff that you guys like that's in my channel. And that is it. Until the next time, peace out. Much love.